So my name's Dan, and I'm an internal medicine resident, and I'm going to be moderating today's panel. We have several awesome guests on today who have a lot of information that they know and sort of opinions and background that they can share about all of these recent changes. And you've seen it in the news. It's sort of everything that's hot right now. AI in medical school admissions and medicine, and the world in general is changing, and it's changing very fast. So we have a lot of awesome information for you today. And so I want to introduce us to our panelists here. We have three awesome panelists. So the first here is Dr. Leila Amiri, who is the Associate Dean of Admissions at the Larner College of Medicine at the University of Vermont. We have Dr. Ian Hagemann, who's the Assistant Dean of Admissions at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. And we have Dr. Sahil Mehta, who's the founder of MedSchoolCoach and an interventional radiologist at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center of Harvard Medical School. So I want to get started with questions because there's going to be a lot. I already see a lot in the Q&A. So the first question that we already have prepared, and then we'll get into more, is a question for Dr. Amiri. It's a question for you here. And the first one is, how is AI currently being used in the med school admissions process?
Thanks for that first question, Dr. K. So, it varies from program to program. I think the most notable use of AI that we see is in the most recent publication that we've seen from NYU Grossman in the academic medicine journal that showed that AI was successful in selecting candidates for interview identical to what admissions deans had selected the institution previously. So I feel that generally as a group of professionals, we haven't yet fully adopted using AI in the admission selective process. Each school has a unique, mission, and based on the mission, we select candidates. And so I don't know if this specifically AI. There are ways that we filter the applications, let's say based on being in state or out of state, or having a particular affiliation to the institution, or maybe a GPA below which a person won't receive a secondary application. So I don't think that falls under the category of AI per se as the definition, but I do feel that it's taking advantage of tools and technology that we have available to us. So we're not there fully as an industry yet, I feel.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for sharing that too. And I'm looking here in the Q&A with a bunch of questions that we're seeing. Carla asks a little bit more about this in terms of how AI will be used in admissions. And Dr. Hagemann, I wanted to ask you, do you feel like in terms of personal statements, AI will impact either how students are writing them or how on the side of medical schools they're being reviewed?
Yeah, so several possible ways that AI could be used that you just articulated. And I think when most of us first heard about the AI chatbots that have led to the current flurry of interest, one of the first things we thought of was this would be really great for writing essays. The way I found out about it was one of my kids tried to use it to create an essay he wanted to turn into school about the history of cars or something like that. I read it and I said, this doesn't sound like something you wrote. And I think he just wanted to see what would happen. And he's kind of, tech happy. And so I think that we're going to see an emerging crop of students, applicants doing something very similar, just trying it out and seeing what happens just because it's there. So I'm sure, I don't even have to say I think that, I'm certain that medical school personal statements, supplemental essays, and maybe even activity responses are going to start to be created with AI chatbots. So that's one iteration of how AI could be used. And I think that applicants are going to be interested in knowing how the schools are going to use AI. Two possible iterations there. One would be detecting whether an AI chatbot has been used to create text that just doesn't quite have the ring of a human author. And the other is the possibility that AI might be used in some way to triage applications or review them, which is what Dr. Amiri was just referring to. I think all of those things are coming. I don't think any of them are currently on the front burner. One factor that applicants may not realize is that in the admission sphere, there's a fair amount of what we call vended software that's used. So if you've taken Casper, if you've taken Preview, honestly, if you've taken the MCAT, you've used a software platform that provides a number of tools into the admissions process. Some of those vended platforms, if you've logged into a school's application portal and started to create an application, those are pieces of software. They're usually web apps that provide a suite of features to the school. And I'm predicting here, I don't have concrete knowledge, but I'm predicting that some of those are going to start to offer an AI component, making it easy for schools to try it out. So I think that some of the hard work of implementing the AI may be done for the schools by the vendors. Right now, I think it's in very early stages and we can't say anything systematic. I'm not aware of any systematic study or review having been done or a survey of schools to see who's doing what.
Yeah, fair point. Fair point. And so based on all those things, Dr. Mehta, I have a question for you. And you've seen how much the growth in AI has accelerated recently over the last few months, really, to maybe a half year. What do you think this is what kind of impact do you think this is going to have on students going forward? Because I know that's a vague question, but pre-meds are, it's important to be able to use all the tools available, right? So how can students who are interested in applying to medical school make sure that they're using the tools that are out there appropriately, but not over rely on them at the same time?
Yeah. First of all, accelerated, I think, is like an understatement, right? Like, I don't think anything has ever exploded this fast, maybe since the Big Bang, in terms of like the way that the world is thinking about it. And of course, we have this like tiny little niche of admissions in medicine, but then there's the bigger thing of AI in medicine, and then there's the bigger thing of AI in the entire world, right? And I think it's clear that it's changing everything, and it's clear that we don't even know how fast it's changed, right? I mean, if you had asked 100 admissions committees last year, and myself and everybody else included, hey, how's AI going to impact your application this year? Everybody would laugh and be like, what are you talking about? Like, it's not a thing. Like, we talk about it in diagnostic radiology for like lung cancer screening or nodule detection, and it's a far off thing. And now all of a sudden it's in our face everywhere, right? So, from a student perspective, I cannot imagine a student who's not going to utilize this somehow, right? Dr. Hagemann just talked about his son who, it's going to use it, right? Like everybody's going to use it for everything, right? Particularly younger college age, teenage kids who are tech savvy are going to be using it at the very minimum to experiment with it, right? And maybe it's even further than that, right? Maybe it's to write their essay, which may not be a good thing because, as Dr. Hagemann just said, it's sometimes easy to spot, but not always. I think that from a student perspective, what we are seeing right now and the natural language, sort of models or large language models that ChatGPT is like implementing is obviously just the tip of the iceberg, right? In terms of what we're going to see in the next 6-12 months and maybe 6-12 years, who knows where we're going to go with that. So I think from an applicant perspective, right, it's naive to think that an applicant's not going to at least putz with it, for lack of a better word, in some way, right? They're going to be in there, they're going to be saying, hey, here's my personal statement, make this better. Or, hey, what should I write about in my personal statement? Or maybe if they're, taking even one step back, can you write my personal statement for me? And guess what? ChatGPT is going to write it for them, right? And they may use that. And, an admissions committee, some of the software products or anything else may be very quick in flagging that. And my feeling is, and I defer to Dr. Amiri and Dr. Hagemann on this, but my feeling is that very quickly admissions committees are going to have to look at it and all of a sudden say, we have to screen this somehow, right? We know that applications already go through a screening process. Dr. Amiri just talked about the NYU study that showed that maybe AI is actually pretty good at screening, maybe equally good to humans. I think the number of applicants we're going to get is actually going to explode even more, right? If you think about the biggest barriers that medical school applicants had, it was often the personal statement and definitely the secondaries, right? Like that was the thing that kept people from applying to 70 schools because they would, go crazy writing all those essays. Now all of a sudden, maybe they don't go crazy writing those essays because ChatGPT is out there or something else is out there. I'm not advocating for it by any means whatsoever, but I do think it would be naive for us to think that there are going to be some students who are going to try to use it in some way. And by the way, like, I am a huge proponent of utilizing all the technology we have in front of us to make our lives more efficient. I'd be very hypocritical if I said I didn't want AI to write my procedure reports for me or write my clinic notes for me. Like, obviously I want that to eventually happen, just like a pre-med student wants it to write their secondary essays or anything else that they have to do. So, we can't, we're going to have to adapt. I don't think we could just say never use it. It's not a realistic way to go.
Right, yeah. And so there are so many different uses of it. So then I want to get into a question here, and I'm going to share the screen for question number 2. And this is to Dr. Amiri. And it's, what changes do you think might need to be made to the admissions process now, given the recent rise in AI? So what do you see medical schools doing to change that process itself?
So, you ask a good question. And I guess before I answer that with my opinion, I really don't know, and I haven't heard of a medical school application that was rejected or accepted because of the quality of the writing of the personal statement. Some medical schools have publicly shared that they don't really care about the personal statement because, apart from AI, there has been years of application support that's available for students who can afford it. And so if you can pay the whatever $350 an hour, someone will read your application. And many schools also have programs that support applicants in writing that personal statement. So I think all medical schools take the personal statement, for what it is, and it has different strength in their process. So I don't necessarily feel that just because ChatGPT is out there, we're going to change the way that we evaluate applications because, again, of what I've shared. Now with the secondary responses, it's a little different because that is customized to the institution, and that narrative is really important for the particular school. And if a school has a point system based on the content of the secondary, then that's something that they will that they'll have to think about. And it's possible that the content of those questions may become part of the synchronous and live interviews that, schools engage with to see how the student performs, on their own. We all want applicants as medical students who can communicate well. And so that'll be something that we will have to think about for those of us that do evaluate the quality of the writing as an indicator of how strong a communicator the person is. But again, I don't know a school that will just think about that or use that as a make it or break it for the application. And, I was talking to one of my friends who's a radiology faculty member, and he said, it was time to write recommendation letters for my students applying to radiology programs. And I gave ChatGPT a whirl, and the recommendation letter that came out sounded like me. It was identical to what I would have written because I put in it the things that I wanted to be shared. And he said there were a couple of things that I might have changed in it, but generally it was that I did. So, the concern that I think we might have is the loss of creativity, the intellectual investment in that product that we get from students, and how much is that present in the curriculum that we have. And is that something that we're going to have to work on a little bit harder? Because right now we evaluate for that. I really don't see medical schools making a huge change. And I agree completely with Dr. Hagemann that, when it came onto the scene, med schools were a bit concerned. And so the thinking was that we should have on the MCAS application something that the applicant fills out that says this work is their original production. And there is something to that effect on the MCAS application. And we still don't have a way of verifying that because I don't know how many people took advantage of one of the services that are available to them. And it, again, doesn't have to be a service. I know of programs at schools where the personal statement for an applicant, for a person who identifies as a pre-med student, as a incoming freshman, their personal statement is reviewed and evaluated 6 times before it's submitted to the receiving med schools, because that's just part of the service that they can offer. So I really don't see us making major changes. Now, again, the paper from NYU is helpful in that it may help us in how we rethink maybe the vetting of the applicants, but I don't feel that if a student submits something with ChatGPT, I mean, my preference is for it to not be there. And as a matter of fact, one of my current undergraduate students submitted a poem for an assignment that she had in class using ChatGPT. And it gave us an opportunity to have that ethical discussion about, did you reveal that this was produced by ChatGPT, which she didn't. And the concern there was that she didn't remember what the poem was about. And so there's a loss of critical engagement and investment with the product that I feel the applicants will lose. And so it's not just about getting in, it's again, getting into the right place that fits your needs. So it's hard to tell because it's so new. So we can't decide today what we're going to do differently.
Right. And you bring up a whole host of points there. And something interesting in that is actually something that Harrison asked, and a lot of other students are having the same question. And I'll ask you, Dr. Hagemann, about this. And because all of the recent changes are so new, some policies may not have caught up with it, right? So Harrison asks, is it against any policy to use AI-assisted writing in my application for medical school? And it's a valid question. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's going to be a moving target, and it's going to income upon the applicant to know what policies are in effect for each of the schools that they're applying to. I'm willing to bet that there will be schools whose secondary comes out with or whose website articulates a policy that the school expects you to not use ChatGPT or the Google chatbot or any other form of assistive technology. If they do have that policy, you need to follow it. And I think it would be fair to assume that the school has some kind of mechanism to check whether it's being followed. I think you don't want to find out whether they do or not. Right now, as far as I know, there's not an across-the-board policy about it. It's just too new, and there's too many disagreements, actually. I mean, you've already heard in the past 15 minutes that there can actually be some advantages and some ways in which AI can improve the equity of the admissions process. So I'll tell you, no, it's not across the board against any particular policy. It does start to tiptoe rapidly against what a lot of instructors and college professors would consider to be either a gray zone or maybe a red line, right? A tool that does your work for you. That sounds like something that professors would be pretty interested in knowing whether their students were using. And Dr. Amiri just mentioned that very phenomenon. So I wouldn't assume that you're in the clear. That seems like a bold assumption.
Right. And so then about that too, Dr. Mehta, there was a question in the Q&A about the difference between AI assistance versus getting help from a family member or a friend or other people versus the help of a chatbot or a computer program. So can you speak a little bit to the difference between how students can get help from individuals directly, whether that's people at their undergraduate or people that they may know, versus assistance from ChatGPT in writing an essay or doing anything along those lines in the pre-med process?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where things become interesting, right? As Dr. Amiri said, there's definitely, we know that there are particular students who may be at an advantage when they put together their essays, right? They either have somebody like MedSchoolCoach, they have a undergrad committee that has read many essays, they have parents who maybe are in medicine or lawyer or whatever else, right? There's so many things out there that a student may have an advantage, and guess what? Disproportionately, those advantages typically go to overrepresented minorities within medicine and people with money, right? Like that's the reality. It is the same reality that we face with standardized tests, right? Same reality we face with the MCAT and the SAT and everything else, where those with means can often get extra help to boost their score, get extra tutoring, take the course, whatever it may be, to improve their chances of getting in, right? And so now, are you actually evening the playing field in some ways? and actually increasing the chances that somebody who did not have the resources that, let's say, somebody at, I'll take Columbia, where I went to undergrad years ago. I had a committee. I ran the essay by them. They looked at it. I had a writing office. I went to the writing office and got help there just to sort of polish it and everything else. I'm very sure that there are many students in undergrads across the country and elsewhere who just don't have those same resources because their schools may not provide them, right? Now, all of a sudden, do you have a resource somewhat similar to that? I'm not saying exactly by any means whatsoever, but somewhat similar to help in ChatGPT or other artificial intelligence models, right? So does it actually even the playing field in some ways when it comes to the writing components? And then if it does, do admissions committees have to put more emphasis either on standardized testing, which I think we've all been somewhat against, and we've been trying to like get away from for a number of years, and saying like, hey, MCAT is not the be all and end all because of all the disadvantages we just talked about, because we know it's a standardized testing does not perfectly represent sort of the masses by any means whatsoever. But maybe it becomes more important because it is at least a quantitative thing that we can look at and say, hey, this is higher than this other person's. Whereas the essay, maybe it's more homogenous now because you have either the tools or personal help or a service or anything else that may have helped you through. Or does the interview become more important? I think everybody's gut reaction is like, hey, the interview becomes more important, right? Now we're talking one-on-one to the student. Now we're able to communicate with them. We're able to sort of bring out what's, what they're about. But keep in mind, interviews can be biased as well. In fact, interviews can be very biased, right? Based on like the look of the person, the way they carry themselves, anything else. I don't want to quote this study exactly because I don't remember the exact specifics of it, but I remember when I was going through medical school in the early 2000s, there was a study that came out that said the thing that predicted a student's clinical grades more than anything else was if they were a white male who was over 6 feet tall. And it was because of, sort of the presence that somebody could carry, because of the confidence that you could have on rounds. And that was the thing that sort of predicted how well people would do on clinical rotations. Now, does that same bias sort of paint our picture when it comes to interviews as well, right? Particularly if we're going back or we're doing some in-person interviews, maybe those biases start to paint the picture. So it's a very complicated picture, right? There's so much going on here that it's not, this is good, this is bad, we're not going to use it, put it in chat zero, and we'll figure everything out. Maybe portions of this are actually really good for the admissions process. Maybe portions that make the MCAT more important, but that's not good. I mean, there's so much stuff going on here. And I often couple it, I think it's actually a really interesting time in admissions, because if you couple this with some of the changes that are happening from the medical school perspective and law schools when it comes to US News rankings and those kind of things, and us saying that like, hey, we're not interested in these things anymore, which is obviously a good thing because no student should ever pick a school based on US News rankings. But there's all these different factors that are playing into admissions this year that, I mean, I think it's going to be a really interesting year. I mean, I'd be interested in how Dr. Hagemann and Dr. Amiri and their committees are sort of thinking about maybe all these things in conjunction, and then maybe an influx of applicants and how we're gonna evaluate them.
Yeah, it will be interesting for sure. And I also want to say, I see a lot of questions coming in, so keep asking them. These are all fantastic. But I want to stay on this topic of leveling the playing field versus bias and discrimination in admissions. So this is going to be a question for you, Dr. Amiri here. We have this question right here where it's, how will you ensure the admissions process remains fair and equitable for all applicants, whether or not they use AI? And are there concerns about bias or discrimination in the process now?
I think there's always concerns about bias, and for any time if an admissions committee takes a breath and they says, well, we're comfortable about this because no part of our process is biased, they're making a mistake, because we're people. And as people, we will bring our biases to the table. And so, where we work really hard as admissions committee members and individuals responsible for having a fair process is to acknowledge the bias and make sure that that bias isn't impacting how we're making the decision. I mean, in terms of leveling the playing field, I think, if acceptance to medical school was totally dependent on only the written portion of the application, I would say maybe, but it's not, right? So we've heard about MCAT and, your grade point average. So those are important, right? And as much as every medical school engages in holistic review to the best of their ability and to what works with who they can train and educate at their institution, those things matter. And how well a person does in the undergraduate, reflects their success in medical school, and how well they do on the MCAT determines their ability to take a standardized test. And we have different, numbers that we're looking for that. So I don't really have that much of a concern about this piece, because the other part of it is what has the person done to familiarize themselves with the profession of medicine. And what are those experiences and activities that a school will value for that person coming in? So for me, and I've worked at 5 different med schools, and research has never been, for example, a thing that a person has to have, except if they were applying to MD, PhD, which was a whole different issue. But I think most medical schools expect that their applicants have had some experiences in the medical profession. They've done some service. I think we all know what that is, so I'm not going to enumerate them, but that's still there. And how much of that a person does in the context of them as an applicant is important, in addition to how they've described it. So their reflectivity is something that I think most programs will look at and read and evaluate. And many schools will look at how much time people have done things, because we want to see, how they've spent their time. And so if you're presenting with a 4.0 and a, 525, but you haven't done anything else, it's very different if you present with 3.5 and let's say a 518, and you've got, many hours of things that you've done. And so I don't think it's as much of a leveling piece as it is. I do feel that if students use this tool carefully, it can genuinely make them better writers, particularly if a person is at a school that doesn't have writing support. Someone had a comment on there about Grammarly. I mean, Grammarly is great. I have a bunch of colleagues who are, long time faculty now, and they still run their work through Grammarly, because we'll make mistakes. We'll put a comma in the wrong place. Things will be worded, weirdly. And so that makes us better as writers and communicators. So I think it's different in terms of using the tool to help you understand your writing better. I'm at a conference right now. One of the conference attendees told me that when she prepares to go do a presentation, she puts her entire speech into ChatGPT. And this is new, obviously. And depending on who she's talking to, for example, if it comes across as professional with applicants, she doesn't want that tone. She wants the tone to be warm, welcoming, and encouraging. And so she rewrites it and then sends it back through. So I don't think what she's doing is unethical at all. It's not plagiarism. It's not misrepresentation. She's making her presentation better and more in tune with her audience. So I do feel that there's a component of it leveling the playing field in terms of using it in a way that makes the individual better. But I don't think just having access to it and, copying and pasting, if a person thinks that that's what they need to do, is going to level the playing field, because there's so much complexity to how a school will accept a student. And you've heard that, I think, more than once from both of our speakers, Dr. Mehta and Dr. Hagemann.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for that answer. There are a lot of things that go into whether a student is admitted or not. Like you mentioned, there's grades, there's experiences, there's letters of recommendation, the personal statement itself, and the interview. Dr. Hagemann, from your experience and sort of just what you envision going forward, how do you think that the weights of all of those things might change? Meaning, something Dr. Mehta was talking about was maybe, MCAT scores or the interview will become more important, things like that. What do you personally see from your experience changing, or the weight that you give to certain things changing in the future?
Well, the interview is already so important in medical school admissions. And so I think that we'll see it have a reinforced importance, because that's one piece of the process that we know represents the student's authentic self. At my institution, we try to have a relatively unstructured and comfortable, even casual interview format. It's easy for me to say it's casual when I'm the one asking the questions. I know that it's profoundly stressful for the students, but we want them to feel that they're able to be themselves. And we have some standardized approaches that we use, but overall it's an unstructured interview in which we can try to understand how the student's portfolio fits together. What are they looking for? What are they interested in? What are their priorities? And we'll often try to dig a little bit into the content of their application and understand just what they did. And it's common for applicants to give us very interesting information about the activities that they've listed or their experiences. I think we'll do that all the more when we become a little bit less certain that the activities have been represented completely authentically. As you probably know, if you've played around with these AI tools, they can invent stuff. They can make things up, and it's not always obvious when they've done that. So some of the details that they include may be either fabricated or implausible. So I do think that the interview will become more important. We're not really interested in playing a kind of a Red Queen game, where you have to run faster just to keep up with our applicants. It's a little bit cynical and almost sad. We're trying to get to know our applicants for real. So anything that carries the authentic voice of the applicant and gives us the sense that we're getting to know them better. I don't think overall that our process needs to change. And so I think that the increase in the importance of the interview that I'm talking about won't necessarily be reflected in the internal workings of the interview process or of the school's admissions process. The overall procedure is still going to look just about the same. We'll still have the same types of data. We're not going to remove the essay as a response to the availability of AI because it's still a powerful tool. We're trying to find students who are the best fit for our school. This term of fit has gotten a little bit out of fashion because it implies that the student needs to fit us, which would be a little bit unfair to all the different ways that students can present, but it still has some validity. We're looking for students who will thrive in our environment, who will take advantage of the opportunities, who will benefit from being here. And I think students should want that too. So to lose the opportunity to convey your authentic self through your application essays is kind of a shame. It just makes this process harder. I know that in the moment, it's easy to say that the goal is maximal number of acceptances, but the real goal is for everyone to have an optimal outcome and to achieve their goals.
I love that answer. So thank you so much for sharing it. And, you bring up many valid points there. I wanted to switch over a little bit to Dr. Mehta and ask you a question, because you've worked with students for almost 2 decades now, if not more, and people who are applying to medical school and sort of helping out in different fashions. How will you change the type of advice that you give students who are applying now that there are all of these different tools available? Will you encourage the use of certain AI tools in applications, or do you think that this is more of a something that you can warn people about, to be careful about some of the dangers of AI?
I think our sense is, in the students that it doesn't change. Let me put it that way, right? It's like, I think both Dr. Amiri and Dr. Hagemann have pinpointed here that as much as all the artificial intelligence and ChatGPT comes out, right, what schools are truly looking for is the authentic self, right? The authenticity of who the applicant is, what they've done, what they bring to the table, how they fit into the school. When I interviewed candidates for medical school, it was all about like, in residency and fellowship, it's like, do I want to teach this person for 4 years? Not anything else, right? Like that's one of the biggest things that, when I interview an applicant for fellowship, it's all about, am I going to sit in the suite with this person and get along with them? Or are they going to be a pain in the, for a year or 2 years? And so I think when you advise an applicant and when you mentor an applicant through a process, the crux of like, bring out yourself, do what you're passionate about, because by the way, that's the thing that will come across in shining colors, right? And that passion doesn't always have to be a box of, hey, I'm interested only in medicine, or let's say I'm only interested only in research because that's the thing that's going to look best on my application. No, your passion can be yoga, your passion can be running, your passion can be, software engineering. Like, it could be anything. What any medical school admissions committee is sort of looking for is like that passion to come through in your writing, in your interviews, and anything else that they're going to evaluate. And those tend to be the most important things. So for me, it's not a question necessarily of, do we change how we advise applicants or do we change how we mentor applicants? It's very much if you're a good medical school applicant and you were on your way last year, you're going to be a good medical school applicant and you're on your way this year, right? Regardless of the new tools or anything else that come out. Now, as I said in maybe my very first answer, I am not a believer in saying, never use this thing, don't touch it, it's no good. I will tell applicants, no way should you have this thing write your essay, right? You should never put in a prompt that says, write me an essay about why I want to go to WashU St. Louis, because Dr. Hagemann and team will look at that in a second and probably rip that apart. But there are ways that you can use this, right? There are ways that, as Dr. Amiri is saying, we're using it today. Our colleagues are using it. I'm using it. I would love to use. I wrote an insurance denial letter, right? I saw this on, it was Twitter or somewhere where I saw that doctors were writing insurance denial letters. I got an insurance denial letter for a prostate artery embolization I did. And by the way, those things are just incredibly painful to write. Like it takes so much time that I don't have in a given day to sit down and write it. And I went to ChatGPT and I said, write me an insurance denial letter for a patient who got denied for prostate artery embolization. And it spit out something that was really good for me to use for this particular thing that I was doing, which was, appealing to a anonymous insurance company at some point. And so that was okay for me to use that. And I think there are things that applicants will be okay using ChatGPT and other AI tools for, but you probably don't want to use it and rely on it for, let's say, your essay, because of all the things that we've been discussing here. So I think as you mentor applicants, it's still all about like, bring out your authentic self, convince a school that you have something special, convince a school that you want to go there. These altruism, humility, these are all the things that we're always going to be looking for, regardless of AI or not. Schools are still want to get these great applicants and get applicants who fit their profile, and are, again, at the end of the day, somebody that's teachable, somebody that they want to be with for 4 years and makes a good fit.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's all so interesting, new, exciting, but at the same time, admissions are admissions. And like you mentioned, students who are interested in becoming doctors are still going to be interested in becoming doctors. And now there are tools available that can help in certain ways. But at the end of the day, it's the person at the center of the application. That's the most important thing. Dr. Hagemann, I wanted to ask you a little bit too, because Dr. Amiri mentioned it a little bit earlier about sort of holistic applications. And so going forward, right, in this application cycle, next application cycle, 10 years from now, what do you see as some of the changes overall in the admissions process? Maybe not necessarily just directly related to AI, but what are some of the trends that you're seeing now that might be different from what's been going on for the last 5, 10, or 20 years?
Wow. So that's an awesome question, because we are just barely getting used to virtual interviews and COVID world. That was a big enough change for a couple of decades there. We were ready to maybe sit tight for a couple of decades before having another, steamroller come through. So if you had asked us 3 years ago if we could ever do virtual interviews, we would have said we were very unsure about it. So that's been a huge change, because we were forced to do it overnight. And you know what? I think it worked pretty well. I don't know if Dr. Amiri wants to weigh in on that, but it had benefits. It has major benefits for the applicants who don't have to buy a plane ticket. They don't have to take a day off of school or work. They don't have to, we used to put them up in a hotel, but they don't have to buy a hotel room. They can, you get it, right? So it's very convenient for them. They're able to get a pretty good sense of what our school is like, but still not perfect. So there are obvious disadvantages too. We just had our second look weekend where 130 students came to look at St. Louis, not for the second time, but for the first time because they hadn't been here. So that's a huge change. Some schools are starting to go a little bit back in the other direction and to either offer in-person interviews or potentially even to require them. There's 130 schools, so I can't start to know what all of them are doing. In our peer group of schools, there are a few that are offering on-campus interviews as an option. There's a lot of concern about whether once you do that, if the choice to come to an in-person interview versus do one online will seem like some form of interest signaling, and that could potentially detract from equity issues and admissions. So we're going to figure that out over the next 10 to 15 years as we decide if interviews should be on campus or virtual or either one or some kind of hybrid. The other big change is the use of situational judgment tests and standardized video interviews. That's a relatively new phenomenon, and we're still figuring out what role that plays, how much that helps. Various schools are doing various things. There's the preview test, Casper, a couple of different options that are being used in this space. So I think there was enough to keep us busy even before AI came around. By the way, there's a sense that some of those standardized approaches to reviewing applicants might mitigate against artificial intelligence because the students can't use AI to help them take Casper or take the preview situational judgment test. So if we want to get into an arms race, we might start having our applicants create their application under controlled circumstances. I mean, I haven't heard of any concrete proposals to do that, but we could have the applicants write a writing sample during their interview day. It doesn't sound good to me. I don't want anyone to do that. But that's the type of idea that someone could possibly hatch in response to a proliferation of artificial intelligence invading on our process.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So Dr. Hagemann, you've mentioned some changes in the application process itself, but Dr. Amiri, I want to ask you then, what do you envision as being some of the changes in pre-med applicants themselves, right? What have you seen over your time at different medical schools of how the students themselves are changing and how you can see that going forward as well?
So I think, students are more aware of the necessity for there to be compatibility between what the school offers and what they're looking for. As a matter of fact, I'm on a tour with some data that we collected, a group of us with the expanded mission statements segment and the medical school admissions requirements, and looking at advisor and medical school applicant perspectives on mission. And students seem to be very interested in what the school has to offer. So we get a lot of questions about, how do you teach? Is it group-based learning? Is it active learning? Is it, problem-based learning? What type of support mechanisms do you have? Do you have mental health services? What student interest groups are there? So I feel that I always felt this way, that the applicant to medical school was a well-educated consumer, for lack of a better word. And I feel that there's more discernment now in that as our applicants are realizing that it's more than just getting in. You need to get into the place that values you as a person and can give you the things that you need, because it's a huge transition. And I think that has come through based on mostly because of technology. So we're able to be more transparent, and they're able to, investigate a little bit deeper. And I think that's important for applicants to know and to understand. And so they're holding us accountable. I'm getting more and more questions about that. So, tell me how your curriculum aligns with your mission. You've got social justice in your mission, and how will that happen, for me as a student that's there. So I feel that has changed in the applicants. And if I could just add on to what Dr. Hagemann mentioned earlier with the situational judgment tests, I think once we have a product and a tool that we can rely on and trust that is, clearly reflective of who will show up in my space, who's the person. I think we will rely on that heavily. I mean, these things came about because accomplishments and things that people have done was never enough to figure out how this person's going to be in my environment. And what we have right now doesn't really predict how a person will behave. It tells us how much they know, what a North American approved response to a situation is. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll function that way. It does mean that they're, wise enough to know what we would expect with Dr. Hagemann and I, how we would respond if we were in that situation. So I think if there's something that we can get that will change our process, it will be that. It will be some kind of assessment of the individual live as they come in to our learning environments and how they will be as a member of our community.
Yeah, exactly. And so the topic of AI naturally sort of lends itself to the increased competitiveness of medical school applications over the last few years and even longer before that. And it seems like every year it's getting harder and harder for students interested in becoming doctors to get into medical school. And so, Dr. Mehta, I wanted to ask you a question about competitiveness, because I see in the chat here, Gabrielle was talking about it, Jay was talking about it. Whether AI or any other tool, do you see this continuing to increase the competitiveness of medical school admissions and acceptances? Maybe it will decrease it in certain regards, or what are your thoughts overall on that aspect of it?
Let me think. I mean, this is the first time hearing the question, and my initial reaction is I don't know if it changes the competitiveness one way or the other. If you're interested in medicine, you're interested in medicine and you're going to apply. Otherwise, you're not, right? And so I think there's, I think, AI is obviously not just taking over or a talking point within medicine. It's within every single field that we can think of: business, law, engineering, computer science, everything else. And so I don't think it makes it easier or harder in any way from an admissions standpoint. I don't see the amount of seats increasing in medical school at any faster rate because all of a sudden we have AI. I don't see the amount of applicants necessarily jumping because we have AI. I do see the amount of applications jumping. And I think we saw that jump also with virtual interviews, right? It was easier for applicants to apply to more places, click off more boxes. And now I think it's even easier to do that potentially with AI. So I do see the number of applications increasing. But I think that if ChatGPT didn't come out, medical school admissions would continue to get more competitive just because more and more people are interested in medicine, and we are not keeping up necessarily with the spots. That goes to a whole slew of issues with GME education and a bunch of other things. It's not just medical school saying, I only want to admit 110 kids in my class. There's downstream consequences too. But I guess my initial thought on that is I don't see it changing one way or the other, becoming more or less competitive. I do see more applications, but the amount of seats and the number of applicants, I think, continues at its steady pace regardless. That's my first thought. I don't know if Dr. Hagemann or Dr. Amiri have other thoughts on that one. I was
awesome. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I might jump in because I think this is a really important issue because I'm very concerned about the difficulty of applying to medical school and the state of mental health of our applicants. It's obviously very stressful. When I talk to applicants or I read what they're thinking about on studentdoctor.net, because adcoms can read that website too, okay? They really want information. They want to know what's going to happen. And the chat bots are all about synthesizing a large body of information. So I think it would be great if someday AI can actually help applicants to make a more informed decision, to compose a better school list so that instead of randomly applying to every school they can think of, that they apply to a smaller number of schools that are a better fit for them, that are a little bit more rationally laddered so that they have a higher probability of getting an acceptance that they can be really excited about. I think that would help everyone. So there is the potential for this technology to help a lot in that respect. It may even be that the chatbots can answer specific questions that students have, the kind of, what are my chances types of questions. Something we haven't talked about is that the tools are general purpose right now. GPT, the GP stands for general purpose, I think. They're not trained with a large database of information about medical school admission specifically. They're trained on information that the bot was able to crawl for on the internet, and the type of information that you would really need to make judgments about medical school admission is not on the web. Who is accepted, who was almost accepted, who was accepted and withdrew, who came to a school and didn't like it. That type of thing isn't out there. And I don't think there are any plans to create an AI tool that contains that information for public use. We're thinking about whether we can use AI to help predict our applicants' behavior, to understand our applicant pool a little bit better, because we do have that data for our own use, but we only have it for our school, not for others. We don't know where the students were accepted. We only know what we did with them. So there are a couple of things at the frontier there that could actually help applicants and schools wind up happier with the process. But I think they're not in the present day. They're a little bit off in the future.
Right. And so making something like you mentioned, they're making a school list that's appropriate or makes sense for a student to apply to. I think that means a lot. And that's something that maybe AI can help do. I know we're running a little low on time. So if anyone has any additional questions, you could put them in the chat, put your email, and we'll try to get to them and answer them after the webinar is done, and you'll get email responses. And this is all going to be, this entire webinar is recorded and will be emailed out likely tomorrow. But the last question that I wanted to ask is, I'll share my screen here for Dr. Amiri. And the question is, what are the key takeaways for students to help navigate the changing landscape of admissions process?
I love that question. So first and foremost, I would say be true to yourself. Really look at the mission of the school and make sure that it's a mission that's in alignment with what you want to do. And I know that for a lot of us, our mission statements are pretty similar. It's the tripartite mission of, research, leadership, and care. And I get that, right? And so that's why we had the mission expansion project. And so when you look at the mission statement, it's not enough. Also comb the school's website and see whether or not they have those things that are of importance to you. I promise you that it's not just about getting in, it is getting into the right place. And there's some things that you can look at that, help you understand what the likelihood is of your admission, right? So if you look at a school and their average metrics are really high, they're 98th percentile, then that's not where you are, even though they present a broad range of scores that they accept, but their average score is very high. Don't reach for something that doesn't really concretely make sense in terms of where you're sitting, right? I'm gonna disagree with you a little bit, Dr. Mehta, on the possibility of applications going up with something like ChatGPT, because the big barrier is the cost. Secondary applications are expensive, and unless a person is approved for FAP, you still have to pay all those secondary fees. So it's fine that someone else is writing the essay for you if a ChatGPT does that. I think the secondary application fees become more of a challenge. I think the other thing that I would invite you all to take away with is, don't worry about checking off these boxes, but truly engage in experiences and activities that are meaningful for you, and really inform your understanding of the profession of medicine. I mean, there was a lot of discussion in the chat here about, you all need to go out there and see how AI is going to change the face of medicine, and is that important for you? And if it is, what would that look like? I think being fully informed and aware of the good and bad pieces of medicine are what's going to be really instrumental in you knowing if this is the right pathway for you or not. And the final piece of advice that I have is take every bit of advice that you get from everybody. Don't necessarily follow it, but listen to their advice. Because if someone's willing to sit there and give their advice to you based on their experience in medical school, or they have a kid that applied, or that they applied and that they didn't get in, it's that single perspective. And so those perspectives all make sense. At the end of the day, you're the one who has to analyze and see how that fits with what makes sense for you. So you live in a great period of time that everything is easily available at your fingertips. There's a bunch of information out there. I heard student.During, and there's people raging on there about things. And how many are raging, and how accurate is that, right? And so again, take the advice that you get, but take it with a giant chunk of salt and see how it makes sense in your world and your perspective. And don't worry about things. I mean, in med school admissions, we're very conservative, because bringing you into the medical school is a huge ethical responsibility for us, right? It's an agreement that we're saying, hey, you applied to my program based on everything that you shared with me. I'm pretty confident that you're going to thrive in my program. And so we don't take admissions lightly. And a lot of it is, what support mechanisms do we have in place to offer to you to help you go through this process? So take your time in preparing yourself. And don't worry about, things that come through are not going to immediately change your process. Dr. Hagemann's got a process in place. He's been accepting students, right? And those students do fine at his school. It's the same way for me. I'm not going to change overnight just because there's a new piece of technology out there. So don't get anxious about all this stuff. Be solid, keep doing what you're doing. We'll make our minor adjustments as well. And it probably won't impact how we see you as an applicant at the end of the day, which is what I hope you've heard from all of us on the panel.
Yeah. If we've done our job, we'll get to know you through the process.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. These were all phenomenal questions. I'm really happy that we had this discussion, because ultimately, you are all the experts on this. I know that AI is sort of a newer topic of discussion, and there's a lot still to be learned and discovered, especially in the medical school admission space. But hearing firsthand from you all who deal with this every day, that's what's really valuable. So I really appreciate all of you coming on to join us. Dr. Amiri, Dr. Hagemann, Dr. Mehta. Dr. Mehta, I know that you've been dealing with students for a long time and sort of interacting with people who are interested in becoming doctors. I just want to give you the chance to say any final few words about AI or about medical school admissions in general.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and thanks, Dr. Hagemann, thanks, Dr. Amiri, for joining us. I mean, I think this was incredibly informative, hopefully for the applicants and will-be applicants who are going to through this process. I think at the end of the day, medicine is just an incredible field that we are all lucky to be a part of. We're all lucky to work with students who are going through the process, and particularly lucky to work, honestly, with bright-eyed, bushy-tailed students who are pre-meds, who are maybe not, who don't have to write insurance denial letters quite yet, right? Like I do. And so it's actually, it's an incredible thing to be, to work with all the students. I think we all take great passion in that. And, AI or not, I think you guys are all entering or hoping to enter a field that is incredibly, that's going to be incredibly transformed in the next number of years. I was giving a talk at UT Austin to a group of students a few weeks ago, and I sort of went through a little bit of the history of medicine, right? And if you really think about it, it's in the last 50 years, 60, 70 years at most, where like almost all of our knowledge of medicine has really come to coalesce, right? And I really think that we're actually at a cusp where we're going to look back 20 years from now and be like, we treated patients with chemotoxic drugs to try to kill a cancer. It killed all their cells in their body. Like, how stupid was that? Now we have X. We have, and we're just we're going to be at this point where I think, I know I'm going to look back 20 years from now and say, wow, it was really dumb that we did this or that. And I think that's because of actually the fun, not fun, but well, fun in some ways, but just like the transformative things that artificial intelligence and other technology is going to bring to us in medicine. So as you all are going through this process of applying and thinking about, hey, how is ChatGPT going to affect my application? I encourage you to actually think a little broader and say, hey, how is artificial intelligence going to maybe affect my career in medicine? And we all, I think us practitioners who are practicing today may be like a little bit of, oh, it's not going to take over our jobs. And I don't think it'll ever take over any single physician's job ever. It'll make their jobs easier. It'll make their jobs better, or make them better at their jobs. But also think about just how this technology is going to transform the way we take care of patients, right? And the amount of data that can be synthesized and understood and known so quickly, it's going to blow our world apart, right? So as you guys, as pre-meds who are going into this, as competitive as the application process is, as daunting as it is to sit here and think about writing the personal statement and all the secondaries, and then doing the situational judgment exam, and then doing the Casper exam, and then sitting in front of Dr. Hagemann and Dr. Amiri and interviewing and everything else that you have to do, and the MCAT, and and step 1, step 2, like there's so many hurdles that you guys are gonna have to go through. Just know that I think you're at the cusp of something really, really amazing here. Artificial intelligence is gonna help medicine take care of patients in such a better way. Hopefully equals playing field. Hopefully makes things more equitable across the world. You're all going to be a part of that. And so, I thank you guys for listening today. Fight through the application process. We're here for you at MedSchoolCoach if you need our help. We'd love to sort of mentor. We have so many mentors that can help you with this process. I know your schools have mentors. I'm sure even medical schools are happy to sort of chat with prospective applicants and talk to them about what kind of fit University of Vermont or WashU St. Louis might be for a particular applicant. And so take advantage of all these resources, as Dr. Amiri was saying. Like, there's so many data points that you have right now as you're going through the process. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I hope this was helpful for all of you guys. We'll hopefully chat soon. I think this was really great, and we may even have more of these coming up.
Awesome. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.